Welcome back, everyone. My name is Jan Surchuk. I'm Senior Director for Transatlantic Strategy at the International Republican Institute back in Washington. We've had a number of people with us during the course of the day today from IRI. Scott Mastic, our Vice President for Programs, who spoke earlier. Olin Wethington from our Board of Directors in the previous session. Marco Rubio, at least on video, also on our Board of Directors a little bit ago. And now we've been joined by IRI's President, Dan Twining, who will be speaking in this session and then doing some closing remarks when we're done. What we would like to do with this session, Matt, I think it was you in the previous session said that IRI is not a think tank. We, I think, move more and more into that space as time goes by, but in the end, I think still our bread and butter as an institute is the on-the-ground program work that we are able to do around the country. Today, that's in roughly 100 countries, either with specific national programs or regional programs. That is the network through which we have come to know many of you over the years, lots of great old friends around the table. So our goal in an event like this is to not only address the analysis, right, and the think tankery of what's going on, but also trying to figure out how we as an institute can take what's been discussed here today and turn it into very practical, on the ground, in your legislatures, in your government's response to enable us collectively to deal with the challenge that is put forward by the CCP. To do that in this last session, this is going to be a little bit more freewheeling. It is a public session, so Chatham House rules are now deruled. So we are joining the Warsaw Security Forum virtually, so assume that there are lots of people watching in various places around the city and around the world. But we are going to start with a subject that has been raised a couple of times during the course of the day and try to go into a little bit more depth on that. And then I'll be calling on people around the table to try to get a discussion going, and we're going to try to keep interventions to a minute or two each. So that we can begin to mix up the discussion a little bit more. And the first thing that we want to talk about is Lithuania and Taiwan. Ambassador Palionis, I know that you have to speak first because you have another engagement that you... Hi, good to see you, Gigas. Always great to see you.
Thank you.
We're so happy that you could join us. You know, of course, for everybody in the room and virtually, that in the next couple of days, the Slovenian presidency of the Council has called on the member states as part of the summit to have a discussion about how it might be possible to support Lithuania in a number of ways and a number of decisions that it has made. Whether that is to leave the 17+1 framework, I'm always happy to have that first number go down rather than up, because the one obviously stays the same. So we're grateful to the Slovenian presidency for making that discussion happen. But it is, after all about how we can find ways collectively to support the Lithuanian action on 17+1 and on Taiwan. So we're going to start with that, and then I'll be going around the table. But Ambassador Palionis, if you wouldn't mind starting a little bit and kick off the discussion, and then I'll be following up after that with some questions. Gigas, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Jan, and thank you, friends. And I'm sorry that I was not able to join you physically. We have a lot of things in Vilnius, and I still have to open Taiwanese reception in half an hour in Vilnius. So I will join you a bit later, but let me make just 4 points. Well, first of all, being, I would say, good student of leaders like Reagan and John Paul II, being the representative of one of those nations, like Timothy Snyder was calling us bloodlands, being the representative of those bloodlands who 30 years ago successfully defeated communism. We revolted, of course, following the Polish Solidarność, but Lithuanians, they were the first to revolt in Soviet Union. We were so good in Europe and explain that we should never ever be divided and ruled by different autocratic states like Russia. And we've been fighting on Eastern fronts together with you for Belarusian freedom, for Georgian freedom, for Ukrainian freedom, for Russian freedom. Vilnius is also one of the centers of those Russian dissidents. But, I have a little problem to understand why my brothers from Central Europe, Baltic and Central European brothers, are not so good in seeing that actually China is dividing and ruling us. Why did they join that interesting communist creation called 17 plus 1? Because it goes against all the possible instincts of our nations and against the historic memory, I would say. It's kind of geopolitical mistake, because if to think objectively, what's the reason to create 17 plus 1? First of all, divide the West. To divide, as I understand, Chinese in Beijing thinks, post-Soviet or formerly occupied states, weak states who needs to be developed by taking the infrastructure, strategic enterprises or ports, just try to divide it from the West of the West and also from America. So this is a geopolitical mistake, because if you divide the West, then you are again open for our old enemies like Russia, who are actually masters of dividing and ruling in the region. So why don't you help Chinese to do what Russians didn't do in the region? It's also economic mistake, because, after careful analysis of 17 plus 1, we in Lithuania understood that it brings huge dependence. It's just one-way street, pouring you with very poor quality Chinese goods that actually compete with you. You have to close your industries, and Chinese are not opening your markets. They're just trying to take your infrastructure or even threaten your national security, like in Lithuanian case, together with Belarusian regime and Russian regime. Just 30 kilometers from where I sit now, they built nuclear reactor, or maybe two of them, to be launched in autumn. That sounds so similar to Chernobyl experience, with all the Soviet habits of, building the reactors that you saw on this wonderful HBO serial, because there is no nuclear safety control, of course, in this country. And it's also a political mistake, because, guys, we've been revolting for freedom and democracy. We've been facing Soviet tanks and soldiers. And finally, you are giving up to communist state that is trying to tie your hands and minds and hearts against democracy, because China, together with Russia and Belarus, are working so hard in this region to kill democracy all around. So it's geopolitical, political, and economic mistake. So that's why Lithuania decided to withdraw from that format and go to European capitals. I was recently also in Paris, forthcoming presidency, and saying, why don't we build 27 plus 1? Why don't we speak in one voice with Russia? But not only in you. We are preparing for Democracy Summit to be launched by new American administration. Well, of course, we have to, to create a one voice of speaking with this huge autocratic threat, together with Americans and our friends in London, who are creating Global Britain idea. So let's speak together on that issue. And let's find some instruments, like in EU it is called interesting anti-coercion instruments, in case China is starting to bully us, like Lithuania, small state, to be sanctioned by different Chinese sanctions. So EU should retaliate to China with the same magnitude of harm, for China to think next time, is it really worth to punish stubborn Lithuanians who've been defeating communist empire 30 years ago, and just to think twice before they do it with any other state. And finally, on Taiwan. Well, when I heard what Chinese are thinking about Taiwan after Afghanistan, saying that Taiwan will be next, I actually, in my mind, I we came back to 2008. I remember being a deputy foreign minister, so lonely deputy foreign minister, standing in Brussels 2 months after Russia occupied parts of Georgia. And I was telling them, before I was together with our president Adamkus, we've been telling the same in Bucharest NATO summit. Well, it would be a huge mistake. It would be a Munich of 21st century if you do not make a clear red line to Putin that this is not the way they have to proceed with Georgia and Ukraine. We were so much upset when Bucharest NATO summit didn't give the membership action plans. And we knew, because we knew as Lithuanians with all our 1,000 years of experience, that this is a great green light for Russia to occupy Georgia and Ukraine. Nobody believed us, but in 2 months, Georgian occupation started. Nobody believed us, though we were saying it 6 years before Ukraine occupation, Russia invaded Ukraine. So now I feel the same. I feel that Taiwan and what is happening with Taiwan, it's more or less what we did in Bucharest. If we are not reacting to China's attempts to redraw the red lines on Taiwan, if we do not react what they say, if we do not follow what Lithuanians with all their instincts of resistance to autocratic regime, we are going to call Taiwanese representative office to allow them to open it in Vilnius, and also we will open it in Taiwan. If nobody from Europe will follow our example, well, believe me, we will have to repeat the same what we repeated on Georgia. It's not too late to react, but I would say, guys, we learned so much from the history in those territories. So better create that solidarity with Lithuanians. Defend us, stand with us, like Pavel Fischer, my good old friend, was standing with me in Vilnius just a week ago, like President Havel was doing it in 96, like Reagan and John Paul II was standing against those autocracies. Unite before it's too late. Stand on Taiwan and maybe try to create kind of a litmus test for our successes in this faraway region, like you created success of the Baltics. Carl Bildt in 94 was calling Baltic states as a litmus test for democracy. Nobody was willing to defend us then. Small Iceland, small Denmark, Nordic countries. But look to us after 30 years. We are a successful example of your strategic policies. You defended the red lines against the autocracies. You created the beauty of the Baltic states. Now we inspire the whole region. Everybody's coming and looking to us, and we really help them on every moment deep into Eastern space. So create that litmus test and successful example with Taiwan. And after 15 years of democracy recession, after all our failures and mistakes, do something right, please, at least on Taiwan, and follow Lithuanians. Thank you.
Thank you, Achu, much appreciated. And we are going to follow that and go directly out to Taiwan, to two members of the Legislative Yuan for their perspective here. First of all, thank you for joining us so late in your evening. We appreciate that. And I think first we will go to Freddie Lim.
Thank you. And I feel strong support from my dear Lithuanian colleague. Thank you so much. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm Taiwanese MP Freddie Lim, and also the heads of parliamentary groups on Hong Kong, on Tibet, and on Uyghur people. Taiwan is very close to China. We're only one strait away. The narrowest point is only a little over 100 kilometers away, just like how Baltic countries are right next to Russia. So Taiwan is also on the front line of China's authoritarian ambitions. Although Taiwan is a mature democracy, you all know that China always claims that Taiwan is a part of its territories for decades. It has tried to block Taiwan's international activities through its diplomatic efforts. It tries to confuse the international community on their understanding of Taiwan. And in Taiwan, it tries to intervene in Taiwan's political development through penetration and dividing the society. In recent years, China even spreads disinformation online to influence the media and public opinion and to wage information warfare. China also continues to strengthen its military capacities. I think you all know that it has increased its missiles targeting Taiwan to over 1,000 and maybe 500. And in recent years, it provokes by sending military aircrafts to cross the median line in the Taiwan Strait. And I think we all noticed that China's ambitions became more and more clear after Xi Jinping took power. Its bullying of Taiwan, not just Taiwan, disruption of southern China Sea, East China Sea, and the entire Indo-Pacific region, as well as its damaging of the international order, have become worsened. So in response to Taiwan's continued disruptions, Taiwan's parliament passed amendments to laws on national security and adopted the anti-penetration law. Amendments to the national security laws were meant to strengthen existing laws to defend against China's penetrations. Measures include increasing criminal penalties for espionage, more restrictions on engaging with China for those retired government officials who had handled confidential national security information. The laws now also stipulate that any political agreement with China should pass both parliamentary review and public referendum. And the anti-penetration law is focused on preventing Chinese interference in core activities of democracy, including political donations, campaign activities, lobbying, demonstrations, and election and recall. Is to prevent China sabotaging democracy through democratic means. In addition, we also asked the government to block investments by Chinese political institutions under the disguise of third country capitals. So although I think Taiwan has rich experiences in facing China, but we should still take China's neo-authoritarianism seriously, as it is now equipped with technologies and continues to improve itself. Taiwan is still strengthening its preventive measures, and we also look at how other countries, like in Europe, or like how Americans and how Australia do it and make adjustments with the national security laws. We cannot face the threat of authoritarianism alone, and no country should face it alone. And recently, China, I think we just discussed about that. China has been putting pressures on Lithuania through diplomatic and trade sanctions because it has reached an agreement with Taiwan to mutually create representative offices. I think no country should be punished for developing normal relations with other countries. So I believe that the people of Taiwan will not let friends down. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank friends from Lithuania for the decision to improve mutual relations and for standing against China's pressures. And I do want to reply what my dear Lithuanian colleagues just said, that I think the Chinese government is a bit different from the Russian government, that Russia has been try to lead the alliance of the communist countries to fight against the Western free world for decades. So Russia has played a tough role for a long time, but China in last centuries, China has played weaker role for so many decades, and so they try to sell a story about that they are being bullied by others for decades, for a century. So they are still developing themselves, and they want to sell that kind of story about that they are weaker and the free world are bullying them, and those countries who surround China are just tools of the Western world. And what I want to say is that that kind of story should not be trust, should not be. We should not buy that kind of story anymore, because if we look at the history longer, thousands of years, China tried to invade their neighboring countries all the time. They not just Taiwan face their this kind of ideology, but also Japan, also Korea, also Vietnam. So we shouldn't buy their kind of story anymore. Then I think the Western free world shouldn't feel guilty about trying to stop their authoritarian, neo-authoritarianism. So that's what I want to respond to my dear Lithuanian colleague. So thank you, everyone. I'm happy to share Taiwan's experiences with you all. Hopefully, before long, we could see each other in person. Wish you all well.
Thank you, Freddie. I'd have to believe that everybody in this room, which of course is in Warsaw, in Central Europe, when we hear what you just described with regard to your very large neighbor, we are reminded here about another very large neighbor in this particular part of the world that has behaved in very much the same way. Now, staying in Taiwan, over to Lo Jiuzhou for his comments and his thoughts on where Taiwan stands in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking my colleague from Lithuania and the government of Lithuania for donating vaccines to Taiwan. And all the people of Taiwan are also very grateful to the governments and people of many other countries, including Czech Republic, Poland, Slovakia, Japan, and US, for donating vaccines to Taiwan in our difficult times of COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that the theme of today's forum points to a very important reality. That is, the so-called China challenge is not just Taiwan's problem. It's a problem faced by all freedom-loving, democracy-loving countries. And more importantly, to cope with such a challenge, the democracies must take concerted action. Taiwan is standing at the forefront of the two opposing camps, the democratic camp and the authoritarian camp. The threats and challenges encountered by Taiwan may also take place in other countries. As a matter of fact, some are happening already, and we must recognize that such threats are clear and imminent. Let me say that in the past few days, China has dispatched a record-breaking number of military aircraft to the vicinity of Taiwan Strait. Today, the Chinese PLA Air Force sent 52 military aircraft into Taiwan's ADIZ, 39 on Sunday and 38 on Friday. So far, the Chinese Air Force has made more than 500 incursions into Taiwan's ADIZ in the first 9 months of this year, compared with more than 300 a year in the past. And we are deeply concerned by the PRC's increasing and provocative military activity near Taiwan, which is destabilizing and undermines regional peace and stability. So we are urging the international community, especially all democracies, to call on China to stop its provocative pressure and coercive measures on Taiwan. However, we are not only facing military threats, but also challenges on all fronts. Before talking about the threat from China, we must admit that our past assessment and strategies were wrong. Simply put, in the past, we believed that through engagement, China could be brought into the international community, and China was expected to respect the existing rule of the. More importantly, the traditional paradigm suggests that as a consequence of the modernization and development of China's economy, China will gradually move towards a more open and even democratic society. But obviously and unfortunately, the result was not the case, or even the opposite. Not only is China not becoming more democratic, it is now more authoritarian, and even the market economy is becoming more and more distorted. To make things worse, China has become stronger and more aggressive, not only challenging the regional and world order, but also attempting to influence the domestic politics of other countries. Fortunately, more and more democracies have noticed PRC's infiltrating behavior, especially its influence operations inside our respective countries. Lawmakers are now calling for action and passing legislation against Beijing's United Front strategy activities, which are designed to interfere in our politics and society in very subtle and sophisticated ways. As mentioned by my colleague Freddie Lim, last year we passed a new legislation which is called Anti-Infiltration Act. But we only can limit to a very small area, which is campaigning, election recall, and lobbying, and so on. We had to balance between democracy and national security. And it's very difficult to do that because China has been using or taking advantage of our democracy and transparency to influence our freedom of speech, freedom of press, and so on. So today we are witnessing the rise of a more powerful, assertive, bullying, and aggressive China. So our underlying challenge is how to cope with this rising and menacing China. And obviously, because China's ambitions and expansion are comprehensive, countermeasures against China must be also all around, including politics, economics, military, and even science and technology. And again, I have to stress the strategic importance of Taiwan in its changing balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. And Taiwan stands at the forefront of the geostrategic, geopolitical, and geoeconomic competition between China and the democratic world. For policymakers in Washington, Tokyo, or even in Europe, Taiwan should be seen as a strategic asset, not a strategic burden or even liability. The Ccp strategy looks very complicated, but in fact, it is very consistent and clear. Simply put, the PRC strategy is to divide and defeat, as said by my colleague from Lithuania. China always used united front strategy to divide and defeat, to divide and conquer its enemies. Therefore, for us, any discussion of our strategies towards China cannot succeed without any concerted efforts and coordinated actions. That's the reason why I find this kind of forum is very important, because that's the only way that we can come up with a united strategy or united front against threats from China. And more importantly, we have to understand the very nature of our relationship with China. Conflicts between China and the democratic world are not just a struggle for power, but also, more importantly, ideological conflicts. It's a choice between two different ways of life, a conflict of different values, and a clash of civilizations. It is not just a competition of different national interests. For parliamentarians, what can we do to strengthen our ties? I think the cooperation of members of different parliaments between democracies is very important because we represent the people. We have the opportunity to influence the public opinions in our respective countries. In addition, in the face of China's very subtle and complex influence operations, we must pass legislations to make our democracies less vulnerable. But to do that, again, the most difficult part is how can we balance the values of democracy, the beliefs in democracy, and national security. And also, the sharing of our experiences in coping with China, in passing legislations, can help produce more effective countermeasures against external influence. On that, I'm hoping that interparliamentary cooperation and dialogue can be institutionalized. And that is very important because we can have more extensive and intensive dialogues in that regard. To sum up, It is precisely because China uses whole of government strategy against democratic countries. We must also adopt a whole of government approach in response. Today's forum is to show that we have the commitment and the political will to take that approach to defend our free and democratic way of life. Let me stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and for driving us to the question that I wanted to put on the table anyway, and that is this. A number of you already today have begun to outline steps that you have taken in your national parliaments or that your governments have taken in support of, specifically in this case, Lithuania's decisions regarding Taiwan. But there are other approaches as well, and I think it would be helpful for us maybe to draw them out and go a little bit deeper now. And I will ask to start Peter Osuski from the National Assembly of the Slovak Republic. Next, Apache.
Thank you. Dear friends, I will start with the old Latin quotation. Historia est magistra vitae. That means we should take the lessons, but we do not. Years ago, and it was mentioned today, a British Prime Minister spoke about some unknown country somewhere in the Europe. We will probably not fight for it. On the other side of the discussion was Sir Winston Churchill, who said, you wanted to avoid war and accepted shame, but you will have war and shame in one. It was Munich. And we always, I have the feeling in democracies, think that there is a big China and a small Taiwan somewhere far away. In fact, most of us around the table are coming from smaller democracies like Taiwan. There are 25 million of Taiwanese people living in democracy to which they came through decades of not easy fate. And now they are living in full democracy. They are 5 times more than Slovaks. And the world is looking away. Thanks God I am not a diplomat. I am a member of parliament and free in my expression and position. I am quite unhappy about the position of the world democracies, most of them very rich democracies, that are somehow standing and trying of appeasement with evil with our total enemy, that is totalitarian communist regime in China. And Taiwan is a nearby battlefield. And we should show how is our position. Since 7 years, I am leading the Slovak group of friendship with Taiwan in our parliament. And since 7 years, I am writing to an Ethiopian Chinese puppet called Tedros Ghebreyesus, who is by chance Director General of WHO, World Health Organization. I am a doctor, so I know something about it. And I am asking that the Taiwan, who is always first in the road to help the countries around in tsunami case, in different case, can at least by persons without voting right, sit in the plenary of WHO. Since years, I never received positive answer to my registered letter. The same thing I am sending to the boss of the International Civil Aviation Organization, with the same effect, because the democracies are looking away. I remember that Trump administration, if I remember well, after a totally unacceptable resolution of UNESCO concerning Jerusalem, stepped away from UNESCO and stopped the payments. If I would be US president, I would tell Mr. Ghebreyesus that if you do not accept medical experts from Republic of China, Taiwan, in the plenary of WHO, we, United States, who needn't WHO, totally do not need. We would live also without, we will stop the payment. You should try without us. And that would be a way how to persuade structures that Taiwan has a right to be fully and normally accepted. That as soon as I found about this case in Lithuania, I put on my Facebook not only Lithuanian flag and Taiwanese flag, but also comment on the item. And generally, the appeasement with evil, we spoke the whole afternoon about it. It's the totally bad way the democracy is chosen. Of course, poor countries are perhaps happy about Chinese investments and about all these big speeches about Middle Asia and New Silk Road. But we shouldn't sell all our principles. And at the end, I will quote a famous Czech entrepreneur whose factories since 100 years are around the world, shoe producer Tomáš Baťa, who has a fantastic simple sentence. Our client is our master. And the fact is that we are the clients of China. We pay them for all they produce. By the way, the small Taiwan has in Slovakia much more investment and gives work to much more people than the mainland China. If China would fall down in the Pacific tomorrow, Slovak economy will feel nothing. And that's the nice end. We sent a few weeks ago 160,000 vaccines to Taiwan. But I was with Taiwanese representative, in my eyes, Taiwanese ambassador Larry Tseng in State Department of Slovakia for necessary materials when a big tier car from Frankfurt airport to Slovakia brought in the hardest time of previous spring 300,000 masks to Slovakia because it was at that time a big shortage of it. And Taiwanese government gave us this very necessary help. Of course, we are grateful. But generally, not only a small country like Slovakia should be grateful, but democracies shouldn't sell the principles and the ideals of democracy on behalf of GDP and a totalitarian criminal regime with bloody hands from Tiananmen, from Tibet, from Falun Gong, from Uyghurs, from all this, that would be totally unacceptable if it wouldn't be done by such a big country. But the democracies are not poor. Democracies are not on the knees to back the big China. We are strong enough and we are rich enough to try to do it in other way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Number of points there as we're collecting ideas here around the table. First of all, there's this question of constant pressure by legislators, right? By letter or by whatever the most effective means of communication is these days, right? To constantly raise the question. I can remember being a young intern at the Helsinki Commission in Washington back during the days of the Soviet Union. And one of the things that the legislators who were members of the commission always did when they met with their Soviet counterparts in those days was to deliver lists of political prisoners about whom the United States wanted a response, right? Just to keep the names on the list, to keep things on paper, to have a record, and all of that within the Helsinki process, which obviously doesn't apply to China. I get that. But it's an important lever over the long run. Second point, which I heard, Peter, in what you said was, let's not underestimate ourselves, right? A small country, God bless it, Slovakia, 5 million people, can accomplish a lot in this regard just the way that Lithuania can. So collectively, when we put ourselves together, we have greater leverage. Igor, I'm going to come to you for this perspective from the European Parliament, perhaps, again, with specific regard to Taiwan. And then Pavel, Senator Fischer, over to you.
Great, thanks, Jan, and thanks to IRI for putting together this excellent discussion. Let me maybe start by saying, even the European Parliament is not an island. And I think what's absolutely crucial is that also the policymakers from the European Parliament can get together, but also can get together with other parliamentarians from other democratic countries. And I think that's why it's absolutely crucial to have initiatives like the Interparliamentary Alliance on China to not only to show solidarity, but actually to really to show unity among our democracies in the face of CCP coercion. Now, when we're talking about the European Parliament more concretely, I think one initiative that's very important at the moment, and which is finally happening, I should say, is that there's finally, in 2 weeks' time, on the EP plenary for the first time, there will be a report on EU-Taiwan relations. Now, for a number of times, this report has been suppressed. Yes, even the critical infrastructure of European democracy, as the EP President likes to call the European Parliament, has allowed itself to be silenced by the CCP. But finally, this year we'll have this first ever report by the Parliament, which, among other things, also is, like Mr. Ossowski was saying, it's also calling finally for Taiwan to be allowed to join the World Health Assembly. There is also talk, there's of course also solidarity with Lithuania, but also with the Czech Republic, because also we should not forget that, just over, 12 months or so, it was actually the Czech Republic's turn to be coerced by the CCP, and also as a result of Mr. Vystrčil's, the Czech Senate President's visit to Taiwan. So I think it's also important that there is also this strong statement of solidarity. But I think what's also very important is that also the report will talk about the need for an EU-Taiwan investment agreement, because we keep talking about this this kind of a weak EU-China agreement on investment, but I think what's absolutely crucial is also that we finally start having a discussion on the EU-Taiwan agreement, because, again, as Mr. Ossowski was saying, many countries in the EU are actually have very strong relations with Taiwan, and it's about time that we have one joint rather than bilateral agreements, that we finally have a EU-Taiwan agreement. So that's maybe it from my side, but I think what's also very important, maybe just one last statement to say, what's still missing for me, where I think there is more work to do in terms of Taiwan, as was already said, Taiwan is a mature democracy. And we keep often talking about, do we need to defend democracy, and talking about all these toolkits that we need to create to defend democracy. And indeed, they are very important. But, if we truly want to defend democracy, I think we really need to take democracy on the offensive, to quote Ronald Reagan, and to really the spirit of his Westminster speech, because that's really the way not only to defend our own democracies, our own free societies, but also to help those being oppressed and coerced around the world by the CCP. So that's 2 cents from me. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Igor. Senator Fischer, I think most people, I get asked this question all the time, people who are not specialists in Central Europe are both impressed and mystified by the special sauce that is the Czech Republic with regard to democracy issues. Performing, like Lithuania in this case, we would say in English, above its weight. And I'm wondering if you might spend a second talking a little bit about what it is in the political and cultural and historical mix in Prague that puts the Czech Republic in the forefront of so many of these issues, whether it's with regard to Taiwan or the Uyghurs or you name it, with regard to China.
Thank you for the challenge. I will try to show that the sauce might be sometimes spicy. I think that one of the reasons why we became a playground, not to say battleground, of these issues is that we had a long-term opposition party, Social Democracy, which tried to win elections some 10 years ago. And they were approached by rich people connected to China. And Chinese interests, both business and political, were linked to this political party, which at the end succeeded to become a governmental party. And this is the beginning of the story. Chinese has their cronies in very many political bodies, but this time they succeeded to have control of one single political party, and they succeeded to impose us, for instance, 17+1 or 1+17 format, which I was completely astonished about because I was in charge of the affair in my former quality of political director of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But let me go beyond this short experience, because there was a reaction of immunity that we tried to raise. I think that we speak sometimes about values, but I think not anything is to be traded. Alexis de Tocqueville in 19th century wrote, "Freedom is a sacred thing." And then he continued, "And there is another thing that deserves a similar designation, and that is virtue." And what is virtue but our free choice of what is good? And I think that we have free choice, and we have to stand by freedoms that we cherish. I think that the experience we made, not only in the Senate, and the visit to Taiwan was a real highlight for us. I was part of the delegation, and I was the one who built up with colleagues the whole project, but also the experience of small city of Council of Prague that challenged the whole Chinese Communist Party. And the experience is that this is, if we stay within the perimeter of our democratic institutions, that we are strong. That if we believe in freedom and we cultivate virtue, we can succeed. Then we can put the Chinese issues, the communist Chinese issues, on the agenda. And they will not support it, that we deliberate, that we discuss, that we exchange, that we question, that we control our government in the spirit of checks and balances. So as long as we stayed within the rule of law, we have a protected area, we can act, and we have the power to act. Very many governments have entangled their hands, but we as members of the parliament, we can not only speak, but we can also act. So there is, and it was in one of the intervention, and this is my last point, there is a global tectonic crack. Sooner we realize we are part of the game, we have to make our choice. Better it is for us. When I speak with my Indian colleagues, I discover how difficult China is as neighbor in the high mountains or in the deep seas. If we study the laws in Australia, drafted to protect Australian democracy, we understand what will happen to us later in 10 years of time. And our visit to Taiwan was an open-eye, because we met people who cherish freedom and who want to cooperate with us. And this is not only about words, this is also about very concrete business opportunities. I think that this is the moment to speak out, because if we don't, no one do.
Děkuji moc. Thank you very much. I'm going to actually take that lead and come to Hungary, if I can, because I think, Senator, what I heard you say was that all of our countries, all of our parliaments, all of us as individuals have agency, right? We cannot cede that agency to Beijing. And for me, one of the most interesting things that's happened regionally over the last 6 months to a year is the effort, particularly when we talk about the value of the rule of law, the effort by the political opposition in Hungary to put the question of the relationship with China on the street and with the public. So, Petr, maybe if you could talk for just a second about the demonstrations and what you saw the value of them being, and how it was that you managed to take, you know, a relatively complex foreign policy issue and turn it into a way of putting a couple of 100,000 people on the streets in Budapest.
Yes, thank you very much. as you will know, in Hungary, Russian and Chinese influence and economic interests are spreading unabated, and it's actually invited by the Hungarian government. They see their own benefits and profits in this case, and they're also undermining the common EU statements, common EU stance when it comes to China and Russia as well. So the Hungarian opposition is taking a very strong stance on these issues. And talking about these specific protests, the protests came about by reframing the question. So the Fudan University project in Budapest, it would be the biggest campus of Fudan University outside of China mainland. So it would, and at the start when this project was talked about, only a few national security experts or sinologists were talking about it, writing articles about the concerns in terms of national security and dependency, economic dependency, and nothing else was on the table. But it became a new question when the opposition, and in particular the Budapest mayor Karácsony, reframed it in a way that it is an issue of whether the student dormitories, which were planned on the same grounds where the Fudan University would be built, will not be built because they have been given or handed over to the Fudan project. So it would take away dormitory places, which are very limited in Budapest already, and this would have been a solution for. So this becomes a question for many people, many students, many parents as well, and not just in Budapest, but across the country, because it's students from all across the countries who would live there. And additionally, making the point about this being a massive loan, which would indebt the country for decades, and this loan, and pointing out that this loan would be paid by the Hungarian taxpayers, is a very crucial point, which managed to, in the end, turn people to the streets and galvanize the people to go to the streets and protests, and with some effect. So we have seen some effect by seeing that the government is not pushing ahead with the project that much anymore, and waiting it out till the elections next year. So it has been a success. The pressure can be put on a local level, on a city government level as well, and also on an opposition level. So I would encourage everyone to take that stance.
Köszönöm szépen. Thanks very much. I'm going to actually stay in Hungary, if I can. Bernadette, and I'm sorry, I didn't prep you on this, so I understand it's a bit of an ambush, so my apologies. But I know you'll have a great answer. And it's the question of the lawsuit that you have filed with regard to the contents of the agreement between the Hungarian government and China, which is, in my understanding, been declared secret by the government of Hungary.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I'm Bernadette Szél, and I am Member of Parliament on the opposition side, and it is very important to emphasize this because there's a big difference between the opposition and the government side when we talk about the China policy. First of all, I just want to add something because I've been always talking for human rights and also for economic rationality, because these two things usually do not stand in opposition with each other. For example, if you talk about Taiwan, I've been always talking for Taiwan in the past years, and it is interesting to know that among the European Union, Taiwan is the second largest foreign investment capita. So you take foreign investment capita, the second most to Hungary in the whole European Union. So if I just want to say that, yes, many people say or think that the Hungarian-Chinese relations in terms of economic relations are very strong, but I must say that we do not have very accurate statistics about these these numbers, and Taiwan is a very reliable economic partner to Hungary. The first one is the Netherlands, anyway, if we talk about foreign investment capital. But back to the Budapest Belgrade railway station. But this is a very interesting project. It is all classified. What we know about that is we are going to have, if we let, 166-kilometer railway on Hungarian territory, and 85% of this whole budget comes from Chinese loan, and the rest is for Hungary's own money, and we have to just pay it back. But it's triple price, what we know, and the return is like 100 years or something. So it's definitely not for the sake of the Hungarian economy and not for the Hungarian taxpayers. And it was very interesting to see in 2014 the Hungarian parliament that we were voting about the second PAKS. It's a nuclear power station which is financed and should be built by the Russian, by Putin's Russia. But we were voting about the contract, and we know all details about the loan contract. We don't have such success with the Budapest Belgrade railway project anymore because everything was classified, and they had to turn to court so that the Hungarian taxpayers can see that what kind of contract we actually have with China. And actually, it will be on Thursday, the 7th of October, when the Hungarian court will decide whether we can see something from this contract or not. I must tell you that I am a very strong advocate for Hungarian sovereignty. And when we talk about China, I always pretty worried about Hungarian sovereignty. And that was the first time that in the Hungarian law, we could see that if the Communist Party of China, the CCP, agrees, then we can have some information about our own project. And it was the Hungarian foreign trade minister and foreign affairs minister named in the Hungarian law that has to make this dialogue with the CCP. What can we see about our own project and what we cannot see from this project? So, and yeah, at the first question, answer the first question, it was the answer that we cannot see anything. And then it was the court's decision that we cannot be just, sent away with this answer. They have to emphasize what kind of international and national security interests prove that the Hungarian taxpayers cannot see anything from this contract about the Budapest Belgrade railway project. And then in the special, there's a special process. The Hungarian Foreign Office Ministry had to turn to the court and give all the documents to the court, and the court will decide, seeing all documents, what can be seen by the Hungarian nation and what we can't. So this is, I know, quite a complicated process. I know that transparency is always the cheapest and the fastest, but there is a reason, there must be a reason why we cannot see this project. So currently, everyone in Hungary is thinking about what can be in this contract and what is this project about. Since we have a 100-year return and a 3 times more price than normal, knowing China, I don't think it's about the Hungarian taxpayers and Hungary's nation's interest.
Köszönöm szépen. Thank you. Lucio, Senator, could we go to Italy for just a second? IRI just recently opened a presence in Rome, and one of our greatest friends and supporters there is a colleague of yours, Adolfo Urso, who is the chair of the Joint Parliamentary Committee in the Italian Parliament that oversees the Italian intelligence services. And I think, as we look at the shift with regard to how China is perceived in Europe, in one of the big countries in Europe, right, Italy teaches us a lot about how parties have shifted, about how leaders in parties have shifted on the issue because of domestic politics. And I'm wondering if you might, just for a second, sort of play that out a little bit for us. Grazie mille.
Yes, I met Adolfo Urso several times, and on the very day before leaving to come here. In Italy, we did something very special 3 years ago. We joined the Belt and Road initiative, the so-called Silk Road. It was 2 governments ago, but the 2 following cabinets never cancelled that move, and that was very embarrassing. Also consider the fact that the only good thing that they told it would bring about this move was to have more export from Italy to China. The truth, of course, was not that, and they even went down. The export even went down because there were just some symbolic acquisitions, say a basket of oranges from Sicily, not knowing that China produces millions of tons of oranges, much more than Sicily, even though, of course, the Sicilians are better, but my wife comes from Sicily, so I have to, you see. And that goes along with many other things that happened in Italy. For instance, the Embassy of China is constantly updating the public about the building of a new port, a new harbor in Liguria, northwest of Italy, and they own it, and this is something really important. They are making moves for the harbor of Trieste, very important harbor because it doesn't only serve Italy but also the neighboring countries such as Slovenia and Austria. And well, they have a big foot there. Chinese have a big foot there. And they tried to do something to undo the government of the mayor thereof, but the news of these last minutes tell us that the old mayor, who is quite against, not so strongly, but certainly not very favorable to Chinese, is about to win again at the first turn of vote. In Italy, we had also something else important. The national agency, news agency, which used to be by far the most important. Now it is not by far the most important. Actually, there is a private one that has become bigger, but it has not the name, the prestige, the history of that agency that's called ANSA, A-N-S-A, has an agreement with China, with a news agency from China. This is why, not certainly only in Italy, but news about China are, say, somehow selected, carefully selected. Well, in all that, we have the center-right parties that more or less are certainly against China, and they make it very vocal. Even though one of the parties, to mention Lega, led by Matteo Salvini, was one of the 2 parties of that government that signed the Belt and Road Agreement 2 years ago. So they are a little less vocal and a little less effective in their work. By the way, it was them that put in the government and undersecretary to the international trade a man who is absolutely pleading for China all the time. He even had in his staff in the ministry a woman who was a Chinese citizen, couldn't speak Italian, but she was official. You could go to the website of the ministry and you would find that. So the challenge is a big one. The presence of China is strong, even openly, and then there is all that is going under, not so visible, but it is there. But there is a increasing awareness of this danger. We were able to stop an agreement from the government with Huawei for the 5G, and several other things were going that way. And by the way, the fact that Adolfo Urso is the chairman of the committee, it was not easy it was not easy to get him in that position because, of course, there were strong interests not only related to China, mainly related to other issues, but it was not easy to have him there. The law says that the chairmanship of that committee, the Committee about Secret Services, the Information Services, is to be given to the opposition. But the opposition, by definition, has not the majority. So it was not easy to enforce that law. But at the end of the day, we made it. And thanks also to Adolfo, we have been able to stop several moves that would have endangered our security and even more than they already are, because I believe that we are quite under the eye of the Chinese information services.
Grazie mille. Thank you very much. Another approach that's been taken on not only with regard to China, but with regard to Russia, is the question of Magnitsky-like legislation. And how that type of legislation can be employed to help gain some leverage. And I would like to go to Silviu Serban, if you might, to talk a little bit about where that process stands in Romania.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm Silviu Serban from Romania. We're the third party in the government alliance. We were. Actually, tomorrow we'll hear about that. My two colleagues are here and they are laughing, but that's how things are for the moment. But let's go back to the National Magnitsky Act. So our colleague tried in 2019 to promote the National Magnitsky Act, and it was rejected by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So it was left there, and we just found it. We started, so it's for us. It's the first year in the Parliament. Actually, the first 9 months, but okay. So we're pretty new. We found it, we rewrote it in order to comply with the regulation, the constitutional regulations, because the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said something about some regulations there. And we added a feature of sectioning acts of corruption with major impacts, starting from the UN principles. I think in March it went on the Parliament, and because we are new and young and we don't actually understand how things are going with the lobby and talking with all the parts that are involved in promoting this bill, we got another rejection from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with exactly the same specification in 2019. So in April, I think, we contacted Bill Broden. We had a short discussion with him. So now we're trying to put it again in the Parliament. I don't know exactly with which help. I think with my two colleagues from here and with all the international friends who can help us in making more lobby and talking with the Foreign Affairs from Romania. So this is where we are for the moment. We strongly believe that we need a National Magnitsky Act because we can provide a flexible legal framework for enforcing the restrictive measures. And especially for the ones, the cases where the order of magnitude needed to get European attentions, it's not there. And let's be honest, usually in the European level, you don't get the 27 votes for most of them, of the restrictions that we want. So, and we also need a framework for quick and efficient solutions for cross-border human trafficking and freezing the access and the resources of things from such illegal acts. So this is our idea. We're going to start it again, I think, in November or late or beginning of December. So any help that you can give us, thank you very much.
Mulțumesc, thank you. And thank you to so many members of the Romanian Parliament for being here, which we'll take as demonstration of your commitment to this issue, given the complexity of the situation back in Bucharest. So, mulțumesc and köszönöm szépen. we'll go to Luke for maybe just a quick view of what's going on inside the British Parliament, and then we'll open it up to those of you who haven't had a chance yet to intervene, and we'll plan to go to Dan Twining back in Washington for closing remarks at about 18:10.
Thank you very much, Jan. It's good to be among friends. I am not speaking on behalf of IPAC or any political party here. I'll just give you my overview of how things are in the UK Parliament. It's a bit of a mess, to be honest. I mean, we were doing okay, pushing loads of different campaigns down the road. We have developed, I think, an overwhelming majority, cross-party in favour of a more sceptical approach. That is not mirrored by the UK government, so things have become quite hard. I'll give you an example. After sanctions were imposed upon parliamentarians in the UK for the actions that we were pushing forward, there was a huge chilling effect. So in January, in response to the genocide amendment, which we were running to the trade bill, which was a cross-party initiative, the government announced that there would be export controls to the Uyghur region, and there would be an urgent review, they said. And they also said that there would be changes to the Modern Slavery Act to try to scrutinise imports from that area. The sanctions were imposed pretty soon afterwards, and then none of that stuff happened, which gives you an indication about where the government is. They are, the rumour is, very spooked by the notion that there can be reciprocal, coercive stuff happening to parliamentarians, but actually to the government more broadly. And they're worried about what it says about the state of the bilateral relationship. So in summary, David Cameron and George Osborne's golden era of relations between the UK and China is deeply embedded within the civil service. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. I would describe us at the moment as a sort of trying to pull its grip away. It's still very much holding on. And I think one of the proponents of that is our Prime Minister. So on the parliamentary side, we're in a pretty good place, to be honest. I think people appreciate what it is they need to do. But that is not reflected by the civil service and government or the Foreign Office, and that's creating real difficulty.
Thanks, Luke. George, I assume you to be in Bucharest. It looks like a parliamentary office, and I think you'd like to offer something as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this opportunity to engage in the discussion today, and also for raising such a complex subject. Our democratic societies and systems rely strictly on respect for the fundamental human rights and liberties. The EU and its member states, along with the United States, like-minded partners, will continue to hold these values at the core of our foreign policy and approach to relate with third countries. Authoritarian states definitely represent a growing and dangerous threat to the democracy, also challenging the security and integrity of Western states, their beliefs and their way of life. This is the reality of a multipolar world we are living today, where threats such as authoritarianism should, however, be addressed constructively. We must embrace critical thinking, a constructive, careful, goal-directed approach as an ongoing policy and narrative in defining our positioning towards authoritarian coercion. I will provide an example of China definition from the EU and China Strategic Outlook. The document states that Beijing is a partner, a competitor, and a systemic rival. This remaining a valid description of the 360 degrees approach that is needed when currently engaging China. As liberal democracies, we must also respond urgently and, as at the table said, collectively, to defeat, against, deter and counter the challenges to our values. The key to an effective joint response in a solid transatlantic relation, we welcome the current US administration commitment to working with the EU, NATO, and like-minded partners in Asia. We need the strength, our allied resilience, including the critical infrastructure, interconnectivity, energy projects in our region. We see an important potential of tackling those challenges in regional cooperation formats that includes Romania, Poland, and the United States and partners, such as 3C initiatives, Bucharest 9. Romania foreign policy is robustly anchored on those principles as part of the EU and NATO and as a strategic partner of the United States and as a member of democratic international community committed to the preservation of the international rule-based order. Therefore, we think that national parliaments play an important role in closely monitoring the democratic track record of government action in compliance with international commitments in upholding human rights. We will keep an ongoing process of consultation in our national executive on the best way forward in relation with foreign partners. Our action should rely on solidarity with our fellow members of national parliaments, of the European Parliament, with representatives from academia, think tanks, and civil society who are unfairly sanctioned for expressing their free voice. I think in the end, we need to remain resolute in maintaining unity and solidarity among like-minded countries and parliaments. Thank you very much, and once again, the Romania situation and agenda keeps me in Bucharest in the parliamentary office, but I think I have few of my friends there, and I wish you a good discussion there now.
Thank you, George. Much appreciated. I had the feeling at various points today that there were more members of the Romanian Parliament here than there are back at Bucharest, but no matter. Thanks to all of you.
Only from the running party.
It's complicated, right? If I could, to go back to the starting point of the discussion before we turn it over to Dan Twining. Žygis, we started with the question of how we can support Lithuania in the decisions that it's taken, specifically with regard to Taiwan. And I just wanted to let you know that we at IRI, following up on that, and my colleague Jason here and his team that works on these issues here in Warsaw, have developed a joint statement working together with the EPP, ALDE, and the ECR. And we hope to release that in the next 24 to 48 hours, saying exactly that, that those three parliamentary groups at the EU level are supportive of what has been done up in Vilnius. So little things like that. I understand that not one statement changes the world, but still, just so you know, that there are people out there who are on your side in the steps that you've taken. Maybe just one more chance for anybody at the table who'd like to have an opportunity. Dan, before we come over to you. Andrei.
Dear colleagues, thank you for the floor. As Slovenian deputy and a member of the coalition, others expect to be very neutral. Although we should not be silent on such a topic, I hope a very clear and above all achievable goals will be set during our Slovenian presidency. For conclusion, I would like to repeat the words of our Prime Minister, Mr. Janša, in his letter on the 15th of September. He said, firstly, we will be able to face China successfully only with a united, coherent and common approach. Secondly, we must stand by every EU member state that is facing pressure. And not the least, Taiwan remains our important partner. This should not be denied. This is my short conclusion. And last, to my colleague, one remark to my colleague Lucio about regarding Trieste port. Port in Koper in Slovenia is very corporate and always looking for opportunity to grow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andre. And I actually am going to get Jancha's letter framed and put on my wall because the day I got it, I thought, you know, you can always count on Janusz Jancha to come through on these issues. So thank you. Najlepšia hvala. All right, great. Thank you all for what I hope was a valuable discussion for everyone. And to wrap us up now, we're going to go off to Washington to IRI President Dan Twining. Thanks, Dan.
Yes, hi. Thanks, Jan. What an excellent conversation. Thanks to all of you there, including our friends who are members of parliament, including our various senior experts, including our excellent IRI team. Our IRI board of directors sees this work, frankly, for democracies to come together to build resilience against foreign malign influence as really the central task for our institute, and that's particularly true with regard to China, just given the scale and scope of the danger that it poses to all three societies in its current incarnation under this very aggressive CCP leadership. Maybe just to sum up, Jan, 4 quick points. The first is just for us to understand very clearly what we're grappling with, as I know you all clearly do, based on the discussion of the last hour and change. Chinese strategy is to co-opt elites in all of our societies, to divide us from ourselves, to lead us to self-censor in terms of our own criticisms of the nature of the Chinese Communist Party, as referenced by the Italian media conversation, among many others. They pursue a form of military-civil fusion, which means trade, infrastructure, investment ties are not done with Chinese private companies alone. It is not a private sector to private sector engagement, because the Chinese government and the party state lurks there within every deal, and the Chinese see these deals, particularly in Europe, as highly strategic, and they are playing a long game, as our Hungarian colleague observed, with the 100-year lease. The Chinese strategy is to cause small d Democrats to doubt ourselves and to be confused amongst ourselves, right? So they say, oh no, we have Chinese-style democracy. It's different from your democracy, but it's also democracy, right? Or they say Hong Kong is our affair, it's not your affair. Or they say Asians or Chinese societies do not want democratic values, free rights, human liberties. We heard very compellingly from our distinguished Taiwanese colleagues today, we know that's not the case. There's nothing Western about these values, these precepts. They are universal, and some of the most successful, free and prosperous societies in the world are in Asia. This is something that worries the Chinese Communist Party leadership, because, of course, they don't want the kind of free debates and open inquiry and free association that we see so vividly on display in places like Taiwan. They don't want that in China because it would threaten their hold on power. Fundamentally, Chinese strategy is to win without fighting. Yes, we're very worried about Chinese military and aircraft maneuvers around Taiwan, as we discussed earlier. If the Chinese need to go to war, they will not have succeeded. They will also lose. Their strategy is to divide us amongst ourselves, to penetrate our societies and our elites and our economies in such a way as they will gain inordinate leverage to accomplish their own objectives without fighting. And that is what we need to be wary about. Point 2 is this need to modernize alliances. Our transatlantic community has a very sophisticated defense infrastructure that has been gathered, that has been developed and nurtured and strengthened over 75 years. But we don't have the same infrastructure around protecting our political integrity, as we've seen from foreign malign influence attacks on so many of our free societies. We don't have the same defenses in place around information flows in the digital domain, in cyber. We certainly don't have the architecture that we have around, say, the NATO alliance. We don't have that architecture in the economic domain, which allows China to use economic leverage and co-optation to divide Europe within, as we've seen in the conversation around the 17+1, and kudos to Lithuania for calling it as it sees it. So part of what we need to do is develop new constellations, new forms of security collaboration that are not focused on repelling a Russian tank invasion, but that are focused on protecting our free and open societies from malign assault and co-optation and penetration by foreign actors, including the Chinese Communist Party. Point three, this should be very flattering to all of our European colleagues. Europe is the prize for China. Yes, there's a lot of Belt and Road focus on the developing world. In fact, however, the Chinese see Europe as the seatbed of advanced technologies and deep, deep pools of capital. And they understand that if Europe should swing away from the United States and Europe should be divided within, that China can act as predator in Europe in terms of securing access to advanced technologies, in terms of securing very strategic port infrastructure, in terms of co-opting European elites in ways that undermine both the transatlantic alliance and undermine European solidarity. We've seen so many examples of this. So I do think it's worth reflecting for our European friends that the Chinese are targeting you very directly. They are targeting your societies, your political and economic elites, and your assets. And it is very important for this group, which totally gets it, to help other friends in Europe who may not be as clear-eyed to understand what game is being played. And if you don't realize you're in a game, then you're the prey and not the predator. Finally, last point, is just the importance, the essential urgency of Western and democratic solidarity. Democracies need to protect ourselves, and the best way to protect ourselves is to work together. We are uniquely vulnerable as open societies to malign forms of Chinese influence, but we also have the unique ability to form alliances and ententes and partnerships to protect ourselves, our freedoms, our free societies. That includes in the economic domain. We should not be protectionist, but of course we must be much more clear-eyed about the nature of Chinese trade and investment deals, including with the EU, and including Chinese deals within nations, and understand, again, this fusion of the Chinese party state with Chinese corporations and private sector actors, that what the Chinese are doing is highly strategic, and we need to protect our economies from predation. We need to protect the free and open internet and the information domain in all of our societies. That's much better accomplished by working together. We need to work much more closely within international institutions, which the Chinese Communist Party is attempting very aggressively to co-opt and neutralize in various ways. They are not attempting to take them over or seek hegemony at the United Nations or in any of its agencies, but what they are trying to do is essentially neutralize any conversation around free and open democratic values, including in how we regulate the internet, including in many domains, how we think about peace and conflict and sovereignty. And as free and open societies, we must work together to protect these international institutions and make sure they have a bias towards democracies and towards freedom. Finally, of course, we must support Taiwan, and we can learn from Taiwan. Taiwan is a leader in countering disinformation, in upholding electoral integrity in the face of an enormous foreign-oriented, foreign-engineered campaign to overthrow its own free and fair elections by undermining the will of Taiwanese voters. We must support Taiwan. It is a strength for us as free nations to have Taiwan as a partner and ally. It's not some kind of liability. It's an extraordinary strength. Similarly, we should support Lithuania, both within the European context and more broadly. Lithuania, another country that understands very clearly what it's like to have a foreign malign actor attempt to distort its politics and run very sophisticated influence operations in its country. This is happening in many countries. But I think history will remember Taiwan and Lithuania in different ways as these nations that really are frontline of this new 21st century struggle, which is not going to look like the Cold War. It's going to look totally different. But that together, we can prevail and protect free societies, and we can go on offense to remind not just our citizens, but citizens in China and around the world that it is democratic institutions and open debate and free speech and free and fair elections that is the guarantor of legitimacy. It is not power or wealth. It is not the brittle one-man rule of the Chinese Communist Party. It is not the, quote, development miracle that China has somehow engineered. There's a much greater set of development miracles in Taiwan and South Korea and Japan and in Europe itself, all of which are much, much richer than China. So let's remember that we are stronger together and that we have a lot to play for and a lot to defend. And ultimately, I'm optimistic. Thank you, Jan. Thanks for everyone. It's great to be with you here today at the Warsaw Security Forum.
Thank you, Dan. Much appreciated. It remains to me to do a series of thank yous for what I hope and believe has been an excellent day. First of all, to our participants from Taiwan, I think it's already tomorrow there, so we very much appreciate you staying up and staying with us, and we, of course, are thinking about you all the time. To the other participants in the room, listen, we fully understand that, particularly for the elected members among you, but for all of us, right, there are other places we could be, there are other things we could be doing. And we value the fact that you all decided to be with us today and for the next several days, for those of you who are staying at the Warsaw Security Forum. I personally want to say thank you, Dan, Scott, to the front office and the leadership at IRI for their support of this kind of work. It's not self-evident. This is we're branching out into new territory here, and we have always in this work felt your support from the front office and from the board and from the funder, which in this case is the National Endowment for Democracy in Washington. We are grateful to them as well. None of it, of course, would be possible without really excellent expertise that is brought to us by other parts of IRI. So Matt, to you and your colleagues in the Center for Global Impact at IRI, thank you for taking the time to come over. Reka, thank you for all of your support in putting people together in the room. And last but by no means least, to the team here in Warsaw. Now I have to do a little explanation of an acronym for you as a way of closing this up. This program in the bureaucracy back in Washington is called Bolstering Europe Against the Subversive Tactics of the CCP. And if you put that down on paper, you will see immediately that the acronym is BEAST. So we like to call the team here in Warsaw, although they are not all male, the Beastie Boys. Those of you who have an appreciation for music will, I think, value that. To the Beastie Boys and the lead Beastie Boy, Jason, Jack, David, Sabina, Amina, Brianna, and all of the other folks that helped bring us all here together today. If we could have a round of applause for them. We look forward to staying in touch and working together. And as I said, now that we've lost our folks in virtual land, for those of you who are here in person, physically, celebration of 30 years of IRI work here in Poland, starting in
35 minutes.
Thank you. Appreciate it, everybody.
We'll meet downstairs at say 5 minutes to 7. Look for someone pretty with an IRI lapel pin, and we will get you over to the reception.